Parks and Councilmember
Appreciate it.
Blumenfield. Do they have the right name tag?
Now we're
Good.
square.
Okay,
Although
I think we're ready now.
Honor to be
It's
Mr. Parks first.
It's official.
You get to be a certain age, you just go sit in the same seat every time.
Okay, we're going to get started. So, Madam Clerk, can you please read item 1 into the record, please?
On item 1, you have a report from the Controller's Office. This has to do with the cost allocation plan for 34.
Is the department here to give a report?
Lillian Sedlak, Office of the City Controller, Cost Allocation Plan Supervisor. It's a note and file. Cap 34 was approved by the feds last year, went out to the departments, and we've actually closed that fiscal year. So it's just a note and file.
Anyone have any questions?
I've repeated mine the last 10 years.
Should have it on playback.
I have none either, but if I don't see no objections, we will note and file this item. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
Trying to do our jobs here, folks. Madam Clerk, can you please read item 2 into the record?
On item 2, you have 2 reports from the Controller's Office and 1 from the Office of Finance. This has to do with an audit that was conducted of the City Treasurer's investment activities, which was issued June 28, 2013, and the subsequent response from the department to the Controller's Office.
Do we have the auditors here?
Yes.
You want to come forward, please? And give us a brief description of the audits and your findings.
Rick Degucci with the Controller's Office. This audit was performed by Schoberg Eveshank under our direction, so I'll turn it over to Kurt Schoberg.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Kurt Schoberg. I'm a partner with Schoberg Eveshank Consulting. And with me today is Mark Eglund, who is a principal with the Analysis Group, who worked with us on this audit. And in the audience are also 2 of our staff, or actually one of my staff and one of the Analysis Group folks. So in the event that there are questions or answers that we can't address, we'll be sure to be able to do that with the team we've brought with us. Just for a quick background on what we did, we were asked to assess the Treasurer's investment activities. In 2011, the city moved its investment responsibilities from a separate Treasurer's office to the Office of Finance. And on June 28th, as was mentioned, of this past year, we issued a report that we conducted. The city manages 2 basic portfolios on behalf, the Treasurer's Office does on behalf of the city. One is a core portfolio, and the other is a reserve portfolio. The core portfolio essentially is separately managed to address what would be the 6-month cash liquidity needs of the city. And the reserve would be more akin to a longer-term investment, set of investments. All investments of the city follow the city's investment policy, which is a comprehensive document that basically provides guidance to the investment office, but it also particularly fulfills the state responsibilities and regulations which are imposed on municipalities. It then adds additional directives to the city itself that are unique to Los Angeles. As with all of the city investment activities that we've looked at, whether it be here in Los Angeles or elsewhere, there really are three key elements that all of them should follow. And they're simply these. First is the safety of the principal, so as to assure that the risks that are taken on would not put principal at risk for loss. The second is liquidity, and that's the ability to convert these investments to cash, and particularly to fulfill the city's needs for that cash. And the last is the rate of return. And it's really third on purpose, because it really should be the last driver, not the first. And the rate of return should be basically to obtain a market rate with making prudent investments that are within the risk limitations that the city itself takes on. In general, we found very positive activities going on with the Treasurer's Office. First, their investment performance was equal to or better than the 13 benchmark municipalities against to whom we compared. Further, the Treasurer reports their investment activities in a fairly comprehensive manner, and in many cases in a more comprehensive manner than the benchmark cities we looked to. They further, importantly, forecast their cash needs and determine the amount, if you will, of what should be available and liquid in a well-described and thought-through process. We'll talk later a little bit about some of those steps are manual and they could lend themselves to being automated. But basically the balances were reasonable and they were further complete. Now, traditionally what you would want to do is not overweight the short-term core portfolio, because in the past that would generally have generated lower returns than longer-term investments that would be in the reserve. We had a weird circumstance during the recession where the rates were inverse for a short period of time, where actually the shorts were higher than longs. But for the most part, tradition would hold that one's return would be lower than longer term. And then finally, despite the fact that there is no current investment advisory committee, there were in place what we felt were good oversight and control processes. In fact, the reports continue to be issued to a non-existent IAC. So those reports are available on the website to anyone who would like to read them. Now, despite the fact that we found few troubles at the Treasurer's Office, we did find that there were some areas where we thought further improvements could occur. One was to have this comprehensive investment document expanded somewhat to describe how the city should manage the core portfolio and as contrasted to the reserve. Right now, they essentially have not isolated a different approach for each, even though they manage the two differently. And once that is done, we felt as though the benchmark against which they would compare, particularly the core portfolio, should be changed from Treasury bills, the 3-month Treasury, to more closely reflect the makeup, if you will, of their core portfolio, with following the risks that they have accepted in its own document. And then lastly, actually two final points. One is that they should continue to pursue their automated treasury management system. As I mentioned, some of the steps of the process are done manually, but we found no mistakes or errors in those when we looked at 2011 and 12 and up until 2013. So, but as with any system, manual takes more time and would be potentially subject to more errors. We didn't find any, but we think that they should pursue the concept of a more fully automated, comprehensive treasury management system. And then the last is the Investment Advisory Committee. Not every city or municipality currently has an IAC or something like it. After Orange County's bankruptcy, the statutes were passed that everyone had to have such an advisory oversight. And that statute was amended, and that requirement was taken out of the state statute. But the city council voted to have, it was disbanded in 2005. We think that, and the city council decided to reinstitute the IAC. But what is lacking now is an ordinance that has been drafted by the city attorney, and these a couple of years since. We think that the disbandment of the IAC was probably driven by the fact that the membership did not require or demand particular skill sets among the committee, but rather it was more of a cross-section of the community, which is a nice to have, but in our experience, an IAC to really have a viable role in the oversight and the analysis of the activities of a city, the makeup of that group should include people who have particular types of investment skills. So we fully understand why they were disbanded, but we think that if they are reconstituted, it would make sense that they be with members who possess the kinds of skills that would assist in providing the sort of oversight that's envisioned by that process. That's a quick summary of it. As I say, it's a 60-some page report. Clearly, there's lots of analysis in it, and we'd be happy to answer questions you have.
Is anyone here from the city attorney's office? Okay. I had a quick question, which is why hasn't the city attorney's office drafted the ordinance to establish the IAC? So it was a question for them since they're not here.
You can choose to continue the item and specifically request that they come into the next meeting, or...
Is someone here from the controller's office? That's a good question. I know we have a new city attorney, so I don't know what happened prior to that.
We
Is
have not
there-
been communicating with the city attorney. I don't know if Office of Finance has. We haven't contacted them.
During the course of our audit, the Office of Finance had made some inquiry, but they and they can speak to whatever the current responses are, but at the time we finished our field work, there was no further action underway. We were told that as soon as that ordinance was issued, they would begin the process of selecting the membership and doing whatever the guidance of the city council was.
I was wondering from the Office of Finance, what is the membership of the proposed ordinance? What is in that ordinance?
I'm actually not involved in that aspect of that, since I am the chief investment officer. I need like an arm's length distance from that, but I know that the prior treasurer had seeked out the ordinance, the interim treasurer has, and the current treasurer has seeked out or reached out to the city attorney in getting this ordinance written. But I don't know what it would be a component. I believe it's something like 3 to 5 members, a couple of outside investment professionals. I believe a member from the CAO, and I don't recall the other.
Did you say that the IAC was required by state law?
It had been originally, and that particular statute was amended. But that
Orange County? After the
it
Orange
was
County
a
bankruptcy?
reaction to Orange County, which I am somewhat guilty of having occur because I was the state auditor general at the time, and I audited Orange County and the 57 other counties of California. And we found 9 little Orange counties when we did the other counties. And the legislature took advice from us, our recommendations we made, to put more controls over the municipal investment activities. One of those was an independent advisory committee. But subsequent to that, and I think in some degree because the makeup of the groups did not necessarily assist in the process of really adding into oversight, that statute was removed. So there's currently no state requirement. It's really up to the individual cities and counties to put that in place.
But in the notes, it says that the city attorney has been requested to draft the ordinance. So when did that take place?
I believe it's been ongoing for several years. It just, we've had several different city attorneys.
If I remember correctly, it seems as though when the council made a decision to implement the committee, it was part of the city attorney drafting the ordinance. But it seems like there was, if I'm going back away, it seemed like there was some confusion as to membership. There were people that thought that the membership should be outside of the purview of the controller and selected by other people, and there was that debate that went on for a while. And I thought we settled on that the committee was really for the benefit of the controller, and that's who they should respond to. I think that's how it ended up. But it seemed like there was a big debate. Should it be selected by people above or outside of the department, or should the controller make those decisions? Then you had the CLA-CAO as part of it as a perfunctory city oversight.
And it seems like it's a policy question that this
Yeah.
council should weigh in on. If we want an IAC, there's a lot of ways to slice that. And,
Yeah.
I have my own ideas about who should and shouldn't be on that, but that should be a sort of thoughtful discussion that we should have.
Yeah. One thing may be helpful, what's his name, Alex Ponder, he's the one that works for the city attorney that goes and finds all the stuff that doesn't get done. If we could call him and find out what's in the ordinance, it might solve a lot of discussion.
Yeah, we'll follow up.
Okay.
So is it premature to request that the city attorney prepare the necessary ordinance?
I think you may want to see what he has, because I think it's going through a couple of generations.
But the ordinance, that whatever he has is based on, 2 councils ago's
Yeah.
thought process as far as
But he could bring it here. I
what
mean,
would
it's just,
what would be necessary, and
you just may want to bring what they've worked
what
on.
they've worked on here, and then we can
Yeah.
tweak it as.
Okay,
The-
so,
The information that I knew we had some more information on it, I just found it. On September 28th, 2010, the City Council adopted Council File Number 09-3050, which requested that the city attorney prepare and present an ordinance authorizing the city treasurer to reconstitute the Investment Advisory Committee, and the department has continued to encourage the city attorney to prepare the ordinance, but they had not.
But I think it was something that gave them as membership to get them a running start. I don't think they were creating the committee from scratch.
The
And-
previous treasurer had put together some criteria for the committee, and that was approved by City Council, I believe.
It may have been part of that.
And I'm sorry, we did not review that council file. All we were asking was there a plan to reconstitute? Yes, there was, and the city attorney was to draft an ordinance.
It may be part of the council file.
okay, I think this is worth exploring. So should we, Madam Clerk, should we continue this item? I don't have any other questions besides.
What you can do is continue the item, since the treasurer's office has indicated that they're going to follow up with the city attorney's office. They can follow up and confirm that the city attorney is in fact working on the ordinance, bring it into you, and then you can choose to incorporate any changes or anything
Right.
on that matter before you move it forward.
Alternatively, you could have a recommendation in your committee report to reaffirm council's action and ask them to bring the draft back to your committee, because you want to move this item.
Yes, I want to move the item, but I want to keep this particular part of it or section of it alive and bring it back for discussion. Okay, so we'll do that.
As a question not related to the IEC, just as talking about the different portfolios and why, and this is based on the 2011 analysis, we did better than other municipalities, but that was also a time when the economy was dropping, so that indicates probably we just had, maybe, but I'll ask you, the more safe, less, risky investments in terms of the volatility, but that would also potentially correspondingly mean that in the good years, we're not going to have as much of a return on our investment. Am I
Well,
off base
there-
in thinking that that's how?
There were really 2 years that we analyzed, and it's 2011 and 12. So we looked at both, and we had 13 comparative municipalities. In terms of, and you're absolutely right, the period of time was during the depth or certainly of the recession. Generally speaking, however, the makeup of the core portfolio is more risky than the benchmark that they apply it against, that is to say, the 3-month Treasury. However, we don't know the full makeup of the comparative 13, the 13 comparison one. We know what their returns were, but we don't know absolutely the makeup of their investments that generated that return. So I'm really not sure that we're at a position to tell you that in a recovering economy, they will be more or less risky. It will depend upon the investment decisions they make, which are essentially almost on a daily basis.
So the snapshot in terms of what we're looking at is not really instructive as to whether or not we've got the right mix of investments and the risk analysis and all of that. It's a snapshot at a time when just look at the numbers. Looks like we did well, certainly, compared to...
Absolutely, it's a retrospective, so it's a snapshot of the past, which would demonstrate the investment decision results that were being made in the past. The future and going forward, as the environment, the investment environment would change, absolutely, and the treasurer's folks can speak to this, but they would begin to invest in a different way as those conditions were changing. So they invested the way they did over those 2 years based upon their assessment of the right and appropriate mix for the city's investment. And I'm sure that's what they're doing today on a daily basis, on a go-forward basis. But we would have to wait to see how that may play out against these comparisons at some future point.
Let me ask you one question. There was just one little note in the report that talked about, I guess, on our short term, that I think you commented that there was less cash, but that we also relied more on the TRAN. Is that a negative or?
No, you recall that, Councilman Parks, correctly. What we saw in comparing to other cities was the city of Los Angeles did more borrowing through the TRANs, which, are tax revenue anticipation notes, particularly around July for the purpose of meeting the obligations to the retirement system. About half of what they borrow is used immediately for that purpose. And the treasurer does not have a say in that process. Those decisions are made by the controller and by the CAO's office, when to borrow and how much to borrow. But the treasurer invests those following the directions and guidance that its own investment policies would provide for. So it's just the way the city has chosen to do it. We look quickly at it. In some respects, the borrowing, because only half is immediately spent, the other half is available for investment. And there are, in fact, some very clear instances where those investments had a good return. So by the time they had to pay the TRAN off. So it's a decision the city has made, not the treasurer, but the treasurer manages the investments appropriately with the funds once they're provided.
Oh, you're pulling up the,
That's the actual budget report on the
This is the report that he was
Okay.
referencing that was adopted by council in 2010 and was signed by Mr. Parks.
thank you.
But it's not a negative.
No, not a negative.
Less cash. You just compared it that we use more borrowing to float money as opposed to keeping more money.
And that could be driven by the fact that the city has its own retirement system,
Yeah.
and many of these other municipalities are contracted agencies with CalPERS, which would not demand that large payment that the retirement systems require. So not a negative, just something different.
Thank you.
No further questions? Thank you, gentlemen. So repeat that again. We want to move the item forward with the.
Paul Smith, CLA. Your committee can recommend the note and file the reports that were heard today, and then reaffirm the council's past action requesting the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to reestablish the accounting committee, and have that sent back to you for review.
Got it.
That concludes all the agendized items on our agenda today. I see no cards for public comment, so this adjourns our meeting.